Welcome back. This is our number 2 of the lectures for lay formation. Last time we finished up looking at the prophets and the end of the biblical Old Testament story with Chronicles and Maccabees. I introduced a topic of wisdom literature. I want to start then, and we're going to have a lecture on that, and then we'll have a lecture on New Testament and Paul. We'll get done with the Old Testament with this. Wisdom is not intelligence. It's not a diploma. Wisdom is a way of looking at life that is shared by all peoples, all cultures. The Jews in particular imagined that wisdom was with God at creation, in the sense that God folded wisdom into creation like a cook might put, chocolate chips and cookies, that it's built in to the universe, that there are rules by which the world works, by which the universe works. And you can ignore those rules and get beaten up by them, or get nowhere, be unproductive, or you can learn the rules and they can propel you. You can use them to profit, to succeed. Think of things that maybe your parents would have told you. A good way to tap into the idea of wisdom in your own life is to complete the sentence, Mama always used to say. What did your mama always used to tell you? What are things, early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. That's wisdom. Always change your underwear in the morning, so in case you have to go to the doctor, we're not embarrassed. In a sense, that's wisdom. Wisdom is the fruit of experience that helps us and teaches us to prosper. That's what the Old Testament meant by happy are they who, or blessed are they who. That's prospering. And by listening to wisdom, you will prosper. Wisdom is also ecumenical. That is, it's not just Jewish mothers who tell their children early to bed, early to rise. It's European mothers, American mothers, I'm sure it's Chinese mothers, African mothers. The idea of recognizing the way the world works and to not fight it, but to work with it, is truly embraced by all kinds of peoples. So it's a bridge. Where most of the Bible, most of the Old Testament is focused on God's entrance into human history, God's calling a people, bringing them from slavery, giving them the law at Sinai, and the whole history that follows. Wisdom is something shared by all people. And that makes it, in a culture like ours that's really open into inclusivity and other peoples, wisdom is a very good building block. Very good building block. To begin, let's just start with one more thing about wisdom. The word wisdom itself in Hebrew is chokmah, and it's feminine word. Now, I'll ask you the obvious question. Why would wisdom be feminine? Well, again, the ladies in the audience know why, but just think in general. I can think of a couple reasons. First, I told you one of the main sources of wisdom is stuff our mothers tell us. One strain of wisdom, scholars think, comes from the folks, from parents and grandparents. Oh, dad can be wise too, but mom is frequently seen as the one who hands down the wisdom. Another source, by the way, of wisdom is the court, that every king and ruler has wise men who help him make his judgments. So those are the two sources that scholars look to be the areas from which wisdom is remembered and handed on. Home and court. wisdom, this experiential knowledge that will help you prosper, could be taught in a school. And I can imagine in some classes, generally in Israel, Old Testament Israel, the class would be young men of the elite, the wealthier people, the powerful people. Parents wanting their children to learn their heritage and to learn how to prosper. And one way a male teacher could incite his young male charges to adore the topic is to think of wisdom as a potential love interest. To love wisdom like they love their girlfriend. Because if you love her, you will prosper. And if you seek wisdom and you chase after wisdom and you give yourself to wisdom, you will prosper. I mentioned earlier that the Jews, the Hebrews, see wisdom as being present with God in creation. There's a very famous passage in the book of Proverbs where wisdom is personified as having been there with God at creation. Let me read just a little bit of it. This is chapter 8, verse 4. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the sons of men. O simple ones, learn prudence. O foolish men, pay attention. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. Then verse 22. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he made firm the skies above. When he established the fountains of the deep. Then I was beside him like a master workman. I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the sons of men. So there is an example of personified wisdom, not a goddess, but in a sense, quasi-personal with God. Helped God create and was poured into creation. The first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs, I hope you have that open, is an introduction to the concept of wisdom and how it makes us prosper and how not being wise will lead us to the other road, which is foolishness. And just as there is a lady wisdom, there is a Dame Folly. Dame Folly says, take the easy road. Don't work so hard. Hey, come and drink. Come and eat. Don't worry about tomorrow. Today's all you got to worry about. Lady Wisdom, she helps us prosper. Dame Folly, she leads us astray. I should warn you, even though Chokmah is feminine, the wisdom authors tend not to have a terribly high vision about women. That's kind of typical of the culture of that time. Though I should say, the book of Proverbs ends with a lovely chapter about a really good wife, which is also a hidden statement, again, about wisdom. A good wife makes you prosper. Well, wisdom makes you prosper. Let's look at a couple of the Proverbs. Just, again, this is a part that's pretty simple. A proverb is a bit of experiential wisdom that's nicely, tightly said in a single statement. Look at verse 1 of chapter 10. A wise son makes a glad father. A foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. So you get the two roads there. A son who is wise, who cooperates with the rules of wisdom, will please his parents. But one who is a slacker or a laggard, not so good. Verse 4. A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Again, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Now that's not Proverbs, that's of course Benjamin Franklin collection of his Proverbs. Look at verse 11. Some of the Proverbs are about social justice. Verse 1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. So the way the world should be is one where people are fair, and in buying and selling are fair. Look at the next line, verse 2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. When pride comes, then comes disgrace. You know the line as pride comes before the fall, or a fall. I'm not sure if that's Shakespeare who took that up or some other shaper of words, but here you find the same sentiment in the book of Proverbs. Look at chapter 11, verse 22. Like a gold ring in a swine's snout is a beautiful woman without discretion. There it captures experience that you know, I think it wasn't so many years ago, there was a certain candidate for vice president who said you can't put lipstick on a pig. Well, this is the older biblical version of that. You can dress up a pig, it's still a pig. A beautiful woman, a woman who's fashionable but lacks common sense, is nothing to be excited about, nothing to be pleased with. Verse 3 of chapter 13. He who guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Now you have to think about these things. What's the proverb author trying to say there? That talking too much is a problem in many environments, and he's talking about that. If you use few words, guard your mouth, be careful what you say, it will be well for you. If you're constantly garrulous and talking, no good will come. The book of Proverbs is made up of hundreds of individual proverbs. Some of them come from various collections. Some are from women. And again, as I said, one chapter kind of is borrowed from Egypt. And at the end, there is the poem about the good wife. It says, a good wife who can find? It's chapter 31, verse 10 and following. By the way, that's a saying that is part of a collection called the Sayings of Lemuel, which his mother taught him. Okay, so again, women, please be easy with me. It is perhaps part of that collection, this description of a good wife. Another book like Proverbs that teaches us how to prosper would be the book of Sirach. We're not going to spend any time reading it. I didn't ask you to do any reading of it. We're going to come back to this idea of Proverbs and Sirach, but I want to take a little excursion and look at another book in the collection. The wisdom books in the Christian Bible are kind of an odd gathering. There are a couple that aren't so obvious. Psalms is one. We're going to end with Psalms. But then also the Song of Songs. I have you turn to that. It comes after Proverbs. It's very different. It is what it is. It's a love poem. It's 8 chapters. It kind of tells a narrative story about a young thing and a young boy who are passionately in love with each other. Now, this is a culture where the genders don't mix readily until they're adults, until they're married up. And so the whole tension is, will he get to see her? Will she find him? Will they have words? And they're just totally enamored of each other. The book is filled with sexual innuendo. At some points, she describes him in kind of poetic, his tresses are like, goats running down a mountain. And he will describe her once from top down and from bottom up. And he doesn't miss anything. She ignores some of the obvious parts of the male body, maybe the the poet is trying to act the woman is like she's innocent, but the man knows of what he speaks, and he describes her using very erotic imagery. Now, the obvious question is, what is this doing in the Bible? Well, bully for it first, because there's not a lot of positive statements about the wonder and the power of human sexuality in the Bible. The Bible tends to come out of a culture where sexuality is tightly constrained. This adds the other side, the beauty, the joy, the delight of sexual attraction. But I don't think that's why it got into the Bible. It got into the Bible, I suspect, because very early along, it was allegorized. It was seen not about a young man and a young woman, but as I spoke of in the past, when we talked about Sinai and the covenant, talked about God's loving kindness, it stands as an image of God's deep attraction, his love for us, and what should be our love for God in return. It's like somebody said, that time in the relationship when you just met somebody and you're totally enamored of them and you can't get enough of them and their thoughts are in your dreams and you just are always thinking about them. Well, that's a little bit of how God is loving us. The Song of Songs became a favorite text for medievalists, Jews and Christians, to talk about as an entry point to talk about mystical communion with God and our love for God. John of the Crosse, Bernard of Clairvaux used the Song of Songs, as have many, many other mystics and saints, to talk about how we grow in our relationship with God. Let's read just a little bit of it, just so you can say you have. Look how it starts, verse 2. Oh, that you would kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your love is better than wine, your anointing oils are fragrant, your name itself is oil poured out, therefore the maidens love you. You will see, maybe in your Bible, or you can easily create it, this is more like a drama. And these words are ascribed to different actors. These words are ascribed to the woman. She's talking about her boyfriend. Other verses will be assigned to the man, that he's talking about his beloved. Here, this is chapter 1, verse 15. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. Then the woman responds, behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly lovely. Our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters are pine, which kind of gives the impression that they're out in the forest somewhere under the trees. They're kind of, hugging and kissing and all that sort of good stuff. The book is, I say it speaks well. Let me read one of the descriptions where there's 4 of them, I think, where one of them describes the other. This is the man talking about his wife, chapter 4, his wife, his girlfriend. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair like a flock of goats moving down the slopes of Gilead. Black goats rippling down a hill. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing. That is, they're white, they're clean, and they're full. They're not missing. He goes on to say, all of which bear twins. This tooth is matched by this tooth. You might think he's mocking her, but no, this is kind of that free, poetic language of the Middle East. Your lips are like a scarlet thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your 2 breasts are like, well, that's enough of that. You can read it on your own, right? So it celebrates human love, and it's used as an allegory to talk about divine love and human and divine love. I want to speak about the Law of Retribution. I think I have mentioned it in passing. When I was a child, in La Crosse, if you drove up into the city over the viaduct, there was a billboard there for the longest time that had a black and white picture of a man with a white coat with an instrument in his hand. And the text read, "Ignore your teeth and they'll go away." American Dental Association. Now, that is a bit of wisdom. Huh? Ignore your teeth and they'll go away. That is also the expression of an understanding that was big in the wisdom tradition, but is found throughout most of the Old Testament. The law of retribution. You may remember when we read Deuteronomy last month, I think it was, the very end, there's a chapter of blessings. Keep these rules. Do what God commands of you, and the rains will fall, and your flocks will grow, and your children will not disappoint you, and you'll have a long life. But if you don't keep the law of the Lord, well, then you're not going to have any rain, and your flocks will get diseased, and your children will embarrass you. The idea is, if you keep the law, if you do what God asks, He will reward you. And if you fail to keep the law, God will punish you. Okay? That law of retribution, it seeps into most domestic ideas of religion, of Christianity, you know. Your parents want you to succeed. They want you to do well. So if you do your homework, keep your nose clean, pray, put your buck in the church, God will bless you. The law of retribution. Other cultures have something like it. You've heard of karma, huh? Karma is the Eastern term for it. That there is a kind of identity, a kind of force that makes sure that what you do to others is paid back to you in coin, in the similar coin. Again, this dominates the Old Testament. The idea that God is in control of the universe. He's got two hands on the steering wheel. And if you do right by God, God will do right by you. Well, I want to spend some time on the book of Job and even a little less time on the book of Ecclesiastes because they add a very healthy corrective. Yes, the American Dental Association was right. Ignore your teeth or your friends and they'll go away. Don't do your homework, don't study, don't show up for the test, you will flunk. There are consequences for your actions and your failures to act. But is it always that way? Does it always work that way? Do you know of anybody who seems to have more than their share of bad luck? Do you know people who, for what appearances say, are cruel, wicked, evil, and yet they seem to do all right. They seem to do well. What to make of that? Think of what we tell people. You know, we say, particularly, we might, you know, we're in a waiting line at a funeral home. I've been a tragic death, maybe a child that dies or a sudden death in an accident. And listen to the stuff that we say. We say something like, God never sends you more than you can handle. That, and if the bad things happen to you, there's got to be a guess that you had this coming. And we don't say that, but that's that's the problem with the law of retribution. And if you stop and think about it, though we constantly refer to it, there's a lot of evidence that it's not always the case. That there are people who are innocent, who suffer terribly. And on the other hand, there are people who are cruel and wicked, and for much of their life, or maybe all their life, they seem to do all right. That's why I love the book of Job. You know the book of Job a little bit, because it's become part of our language. The patience of Job. I don't think too many of you have read it. It's not an easy read by any means. It has a prose envelope, and then the heart of it is a long 38, 39, 40 chapters of poetry. There's two different things going on there. Let me begin with this. Job is not a documentary, okay? Because that is the opening scene. Any of the book is not something that really happened. It is instead, it's the backdrop against which wise people can debate the pluses and minuses of the law of retribution. Here's how it begins. Job is a good man, a righteous man. The book of Job says so. And I need to find it here. But the very first line of the book acknowledges that Job is a good fellow. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright, who feared God and turned away from evil. Okay, so he's a very righteous man. Now, on a given day, Satan walks into the throne room of God, and God speaks up and says, "Hey, Satan, have you seen my friend Job? What a wonderful guy he is." Now, because what's going to happen, you really don't want God to bring up your name before Satan. I should warn you, the Bible, remember, it took 1,000 years. It took 1,000 years to shape the Bible. And there are many different levels. And so ideas evolve. Remember back in Moses at Mount Sinai, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that's a good thing. By the time we get to the Gospel of Matthew, not a good thing. Jesus says, no, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn off of them the left. So you can expect ideas to grow and change. So it is with Satan. By New Testament times, even before New Testament, Satan is the great tempter, the father of lies. But that's not who he is in the book of Job. He's more like the district attorney. He's the one who reminds God of things that are going on down below. Okay? He's not the tempter. He's the one who calls us on a carpet when we haven't been what we should be. Anyway, Satan says, well, no wonder Job is righteous, because you've blessed him. You've given him every good thing. He's afraid of losing it. That's why he's so good to you. Take his stuff away. It'll all be over. Well, God says, okay. Now, there's the problem. If you think that really happened, it makes God to be kind of a schmuck, huh? Satan has maneuvered God into a corner. Because if God says, no, you can't do it, well, it shows that he doesn't have confidence in Job. There's no way for God to get out of this except, okay, go ahead. So again, it's not a documentary. It's the setup for this great wisdom debate. So, as you know, Job loses his children, his flocks, his house, but he keeps his cool. Next scene, back in heaven again. Again, God points out Job. You tried to make me turn on Job, but he's still righteous. Satan says, well, that's because anybody will give up everything to save themselves, but touch him and he will curse you to your face. Again, God has to, go along, because otherwise it looks like he doesn't really believe that Job is what he thinks Job is. So Satan's allowed to touch Job's person, and that's when the floor kind of falls out, right? And here's the end of that portion. His wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." He said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. So, Job's coming out clean. Job has 3 friends who come visit: Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. And they come to make an appointment to meet together. They want to comfort him. They don't say anything for the longest time. Now at this point, Job does indeed seem to be the man of patience, the patience of Job. But people who talk that way have never read beyond chapter 2. That's the end of the prose section. And now starts the poetry. And Job opens his mouth, and he is just coming apart in his unhappiness. "Let the day perish wherein I was born, the night which said a man child is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Why is light given to him that is in misery, life to the bitter in soul, who long for death? But it comes not. Dig for it more than for hidden treasures." Well, Job's patience is gone. What's going to happen now is Job's going to unload for a chapter, and one by one his comforters are going to respond to him. Eliphaz being the first one. There's 3 friends, so Job gives 3 speeches. Each of the friends responds. Then 3 more speeches, and 3 more. So there's 9, 3 times around we go. That's the heart of the book. It's kind of tough sledding to read it all. Not a lot of dramatic change. The 3 friends they are the spokesmen for the law of retribution. They say, God doesn't let bad things happen to good people. God only rewards good people with good things. So you must have done something wrong. Or maybe your children did something wrong. Fess up and God will cut you some slack. But Job continues to say what he knows to be true. I am a righteous man. I don't deserve this. This is not fair. At one point, he kind of shakes his fist at God and says, I wish you were here and you and I could go, toe to toe, and I would ask you questions and you'd have to answer for this injustice. Well, eventually, takes a while, but eventually, chapters 38, 39, 40, God does show up. But Job doesn't get to question God. Instead, God buries Job with questions. Beautiful questions. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched the line like it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone? The poetry here describes God's creation like a man building a building. These questions, now you might think, oh, poor Job, God's beating up on him. But what's going on here is God is stretching Job's awareness. Job thinks he understands how the universe works. With all of these questions that he doesn't get to answer, he has no answer. He begins to understand that, yes, I'm innocent. Yes, I'm suffering. I don't know why. And I should just be okay with that. So this goes on, I say, for 4 chapters. You think, oh my gosh, this makes God seem like a bully. Wait, there's good news at the end. So God has gone on full of these questions, showing Job that the world is bigger than he thinks. And then, chapter 42, Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now again, you're thinking, this is not a happy book. God has crushed Job. No. Job sees that life is a mystery. There are things that cannot be understood. He says, I had heard about you from others, but now I see you face to face. I think, in one sense, that's one of the truths of the book. That there's no philosophy, there's no explanation for why bad things happen to good people. The only thing that can help is if you have seen God face to face. A line of Nietzsche. Nietzsche was no Christian, but he said, if you have a why, you can handle almost any what. Now that's not what Job is saying, but it's something similar. The thing that will help us endure through troubles that cannot be explained is having known the Lord. Now there's more. Because, this is pay dirt now, that ends the poetic section. We go back to prose. And then the Lord, it says, after the Lord, this is verse 7 of 42. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz, my wrath is kindled against you and against your 2 friends. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So he tells him to have Job pray for them. My servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. I told you that the 3 friends are the spokesmen for the law of retribution, which again permeates most of the Old Testament. But in the end, God says to them, you have not spoken the truth as my friend Job has. You see, the book of Job is that hand that dares to raise itself and say, you know, when you say, you know, that good things only happen to good people, and I say that's baloney, because I know cases when that's not how it's been. Job is a wonderful counter. It's the minority voice in the Old Testament, but I am grateful for the minority voice because it keeps us from saying stupid things like, God never gives you more than you can handle. Don't ever say that. Now, if you have had an affliction, you lost a child, you're fighting cancer, you can say that. But I, who am not feeling that, that's not my right to say. So the book of Job does not answer the problem of evil, but it keeps shallow, churchy people from saying stupid things. It's a mystery. And all we can hope is that in our knowledge of God, we are prepared for any crisis when it comes. The book of Ecclesiastes, or Koheleth, is a sidekick, a sibling to Job. He's a cynic. He looks at the world and people say sweet things. He goes, this is not the case. You know, things go round and round. We never seem to get anywhere. It's the 3rd chapter that you know of Ecclesiastes, sung by the Byrds back in the 60s. To everything, turn, turn, there is a season. You know, people choose that for their funerals sometimes. What it's really saying is life is meaningless. It just goes round in circles. So don't think that you're, gaining on it. Again, there's more to the book than that. It's a thoughtful minority voice because the main tenor of Proverbs of wisdom is the world is orderly. Again, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. It makes it sound like it's always that way. But it isn't always that way, is it? It is true. Ignore your teeth and they'll go away. But it's not always the case. I want to talk about 2 more things about wisdom. I want to talk about Jesus' response to the law of retribution, and I want to talk about the impact that the big event at the end of the biblical story of history offers. That is the Maccabean revolt. So I'm going to write this down so I remember. Maccabean revolt. First, Jesus. Cut to the chase. Every time somebody brings up the law of retribution in the New Testament, Jesus goes, talk to the hand. He doesn't buy it. It's Lent now. I'm not sure when you'll see this, but if you can think back some weeks ago, well, you didn't go to church, obviously, because church was closed, but maybe you read it at home or saw it on Mass, saw Mass on TV. There's the gospel of the man born blind. Now, in the full gospel, maybe you didn't hear the full gospel, it begins with the disciples of Jesus seeing a man born blind. That's key, born blind. And when they see the man born blind, they ask Jesus a question. Did this man, why is he blind? Is it his sin or his parents' sin? See, the disciples of Jesus have totally swallowed the law of retribution. He's born blind. He couldn't have sinned. I mean, he was already blind when he was born. Whose fault is it? Did his parents sin? Jesus, again, read the 9th chapter, opening verses of John's Gospel. He says, neither, but that God might show glory through his becoming well. I'm kind of paraphrasing. In Luke's Gospel, in chapter 13, there are 2 little episodes where, again, Jesus disses his contemporaries' fascination with the law of retribution, the idea of karma. There were some Galileans, they lived 100 miles north of Jerusalem, very pious people who made the long journey on foot, 3 days of walking, dragging animals that they were going to sacrifice in the temple. They were there on their big day. It must have been a big day in their life. And maybe there were other Jews throwing stones at the Roman garrison across the way. And Pilate let loose the Roman garrison to punish them. And they killed not just the people throwing stones, but all these Galilean pilgrims. They were pious, good people. Good things should happen to good people. Anyway, a person in the crowd says, Jesus, what do you think about those Galileans whose blood was mixed with that of their sacrifices? That is, the soldiers killed them and their blood poured out like the blood of the animals that they brought. Jesus says, I hear him sigh, he says, do you think that these people were more wicked than anybody in this generation? Again, the implication of the question was, these pious people must have really been wicked. Jesus says, no, you are all wicked. You're all got something coming. God, you better look out, better make right with God because none of you are righteous. A second story follows where Jesus uses an image of a tower that fell and crushed people. Again, he says, were these people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time put there by God because they were wicked? You all need to repent. And then he tells a parable about a garden and it needs to be manured and it gets one more chance. Okay. So every time the law of retribution comes up, Jesus disses it. Live and learn. Now, what about the link to the Maccabean revolt? In the end of my previous lecture, I read from the books of Maccabees, second Maccabees, this little passage where Judas Maccabeus takes up the dead bodies of his soldiers, discovers that they had lucky charms on them, and he makes a collection that's sent to the temple so that offerings can be made for these soldiers who fought for the right, but proved or showed that they weren't everything that they pretended to be. And then the narrator goes on and says, this was a good thing because it shows that he believed in the resurrection. Throughout most of the Old Testament, there is no expectation of life beyond this life. As I said earlier, not Abraham, not King David, not Jeremiah, not Miriam, not Deborah the judge. None of them have any expectation. This is all you got, boys and girls, which is why it's so important to have children. That's the only way you can live on. But the law of retribution came to a big collision with this period of the Maccabees. Remember, I told you that there was collusion, collusion between the upper class of Judaism and their Greek overlords, the King Antiochus and his minions, to make Jerusalem a Greek city, like all the other Greek cities, like Athens, like Tyre, Greek customs, Greek music, Greek art, Greek theater, Greek games. And there was a reaction on the part of many Jews. They didn't want to give up their faith, give up. And so the powers that be tried to eliminate Judaism, forbade circumcision, burned Torah scrolls. Read 2 Maccabees. There's several rather dramatic stories about good, pious Jews who suffered, who were martyrs. The first martyrs in the Old Testament because they were holding true to God. Now, the law of retribution should say that shouldn't happen. These people of all, but what you had in the story of the Maccabees is the unbelieving, wicked Jews prospered, and the faithful Jews got burned and carved up and murdered. That violates the law of retribution. It's because of that great collision that scholars propose that the idea that there must be more to life. God must have another plan than just to say you get what you deserve while you live. That if you're good, good things happen. If you're bad, bad things happen. It was this collision between the law of retribution and the reality that the good people got the shaft during the years of the Greek takeover, if you will, that spurred Jews to realize that there must be more. And so was born the concept of resurrection. Born, not the right word. We don't know where it came from, but it's this problem with the law of retribution that sparked Judaism to think this through. And so began among some Jews the idea that God will reward the just in a life to come, where the wicked will either not come back at all or will be punished. This is 167 to 164 BC is the real heart of this tension. And that's exactly the time, it's after this time, that we have the only witnesses in our Bible to a belief in resurrection. Daniel 12, 2nd Maccabees, that I read for you, 12, and the third one is escaping me, wisdom. I don't know that I read that this morning. Let me read, or earlier. Let me read it now. If I read it before, well, hear it again. You've heard it. You've heard it at funerals because there aren't many Old Testament texts that have any hope of retribution beyond this life. But you've heard this. The 3rd chapter of the book of wisdom. But the souls of the just are in the hands of God, and no torment will touch them. In the eyes of the foolish, they seem to have died. They seem to have died. Their departure was thought to be an affliction. They're going forth from us to be utter destruction. But they are at peace. For though in the sight of men they were punished, their hope is full of immortality. Having been disciplined a little, they will receive great good, because God tested them and found them worthy of himself. In the time of their visitation, they will shine and will run like sparks through the stubble, and so on. Now, I know I started out by being very positive about wisdom, and then I spent a lot of time attacking the law of retribution. I just think as lay formation candidates, as people of faith, we need to learn from the scriptures a bigger view of how we deal with the problem of evil, and how there are some false runs, some false answers, and a more remarkable truth. But it takes some thinking. It requires you to watch your mouth. Think about, we don't know why bad things happen to good people. The problem of evil continues to be such. In one sense, it's the strongest argument against God's existence. But be careful of saying simplistic things that maybe make sense to you because your life is easy, and not so much of others. I encourage you to read Proverbs and Sirach, the kind of classic statement of traditional Hebrew wisdom. Read Job and read Ecclesiastes, that minority voice in the Old Testament that says, be careful of being too simplistic, you churchy people. And then the Psalms, which is my last topic for today. Psalms is a big, big book. You have 2 handouts that are going to be given to you, or going to get into your hand. You are familiar with Psalms from Praying Liturgy of the Hours. I want to tap you into a very important thing to knowledge to make it more helpful. The Psalms are in a sense, the hymn book of the Second Temple. We have the texts, not the music, but the texts of these pieces that were written maybe over 800 years, 700 years. We have some Psalms that go back at least to the time of David. We have some Psalms that were written after the exile. So we know they were continually being written and added to. The book of Psalms is not neatly, tidily put together by theme, but there are sad Psalms, mad Psalms, glad Psalms. You need to pay attention to the kind of writing, the literary form. So before you pray a psalm, ask yourself, what kind of song is this? The 2 handouts, this one, for every psalm, it lists a classic statement for what kind of psalm it is. Sad, glad, mad. Here, this is a combination of that, plus some other thoughts by a scholar named Walter Brueggemann. He has a very fresh way for us to look at the Psalms by looking at three circumstances in our life. One circumstance is he calls orientation. Orientation is when everything is going your way. Everything is happy and jolly, and the sun is shining, and your kids are perfect, and God's in his heaven, and all is right with the world. Let me read you an example of Psalm 8. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You whose glory above the heavens is chanted by the mouth of babes and infants. You have founded a bulwark because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger, and so on. How wonderful it is to be human, he says. Oh Lord my God, how great you are in all the earth. Well, there are days like that, aren't there? In this idea of orientation, when God is known and is reliable in your life, there are psalms of creation, talk about how orderly creation is. There are wisdom psalms. There are songs of trust. One of the psalms is, like a child resting on its mother's lap, all content, so am I with you, O Lord my God. Okay? I wish you days like that. And there are psalms then that reflect that. Second category, disorientation. That is when there is a gap between what your faith in God says should be and your current status. The main category under that are lament psalms. God, why is this going this way? How could this be different? What did I do to deserve this? Complaint psalms. Now, a lament is not just a bitch session. A lament is trusting that God can do things. He just seems to be asleep at the wheel. So we call on God, we petition him to respond and to help. This is the largest section in the book of Psalms, the laments. There are individual laments, there are corporate laments, when the whole nation's upset. There are penitential psalms. Psalm 51, it's again in your Liturgy of the Hours. It comes up every Friday. When I was younger, I thought, gosh, every Friday, what a bummer. But as I've gotten older, I appreciate it more and more. I see the need for it. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgression. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity. Cleanse me from my sin. I'm not what I should be. Okay? The third big category that Dr. Brueggemann offers is what he calls new orientation. That is, things were good and then things were bad, and now things are coming back into focus. Trouble has been resolved. I'm celebrating that. The easiest idea, think of Thanksgiving. A Thanksgiving is a word of praise when something wonderful has happened. Things weren't so good, but now they're good again. So there are Thanksgiving psalms, songs of trust. 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Though I walk in the valley of darkness, things are bad, I fear no evil, for you are with me. See? So I suggest I give this to you. Try to get familiar with the different kinds. Again, these three broad categories under which these various other kinds of psalms fit. The more you can identify what kind of psalm you're praying, the more you can align yourself to its motive. Maybe you're feeling good today, and the psalm is a lament psalm. Well, don't pray it for yourself. There are lots of sad people in the world, lots of grieving people, lots of hungry people. Pray it for them. If you can't pray it for yourself, pray it for someone else in that spot. Wisdom, again, is a kind of a grab bag of books, the oddest that don't fit in so well, like the Song of Songs and the Psalms. The basic story of wisdom tradition, which would be Sirach and Proverbs, and the two that are kind of the minority voices, Job and Ecclesiastes. I invite you to explore and discover them. Okay?